a mother's worst fear.
I was terrified that I would never, ever get to hold her again.
Please, I just need my baby back.
This is crazy.
It was a concern in our minds about selling the baby on the black market.
If this person were to get to the airport, we may never see either one of them ever again.
It's a race against the clock to rescue an infant from her captors
I didn't know if she was dead or alive.
before it's too late.
Children can't defend themselves. Nobody's going home until we find this baby. There are people in this world who will go to any length to solve a personal problem. Trust your fellow man? I don't. I wouldn't recommend that you do either.
It's Friday morning, and Evelyn Reed is interviewing babysitters for her 4-week-old granddaughter.
Okay, Sharon, what about infants? Do you have any experience?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the last family I worked for, they had a newborn and a 5-year-old.
They sat in the living room and talked for a while. She was quite impressed with this lady.
Your resume looks great. I think we should set something up.
Sure.
Would you hold her for a minute so I can get the phone?
Yes, absolutely.
You two can get acquainted. Thank you.
The phone is in another room, and the most logical thing in the world, really, is here, you hold the baby. Let's see how you do.
Hello?
Evelyn was talking to this person on the phone, and when she completed the conversation, she returned back into the living room.
Sharon? Sharon? Oh my God, what are you doing? Where are you going? Stop! Where are you going? My baby!
Across town, Sergeant Joe Kenda is stuck in the hot seat.
The homicide unit's budget is getting out of control.
I was always annoyed when I was in these budgetary meetings. I signed up to kick doors and pull guns on people, and I'm good at that. I didn't sign up to read spreadsheets.
With all due respect, sir, I'm not going to let a case slip through the cracks due to money. It's not what we do.
And I looked down at that pager, and it says 911, and my thought was, bless you. I just got out of this meeting.
Now, if you pardon me, sir, I have an emergency to take care of, overtime or not.
Dispatch directs Kenda to a residential neighborhood where he's met by Sergeant Robert Sapp, head of the Juvenile Crimes Unit.
Bob,
Joe, thanks for coming.
so what do you got?
Got an abduction. Infant, 4-week-old, Rachel White, taken from inside. The baby's grandmother, Evelyn Reed, was inside interviewing babysitters at the time, and one of them ran off with baby Rachel.
Really? Any contact with her? Ransom?
Nothing so far. Look, we're in the dark about this, but first responders were able to put together a brief description of the lady and her vehicle.
That's the grandmother?
That's her.
Want to talk to her?
Let's do it.
The first move is to question the 911 caller, the missing infant's grandmother, Evelyn Reed.
Thank you. We'll take it from there. Hello, ma'am. I'm Sergeant Sapp. This is Sergeant Kenda. We understand that you have been doing an awful lot today. Just know that every available officer will be out looking for baby Rachel.
She felt that she was responsible for the child being gone. When something goes wrong, we blame ourselves.
Your daughter, is she the child's mother?
Yes, Cora, I called her. She's on her way.
Ma'am, we will find your granddaughter, but we need to know everything.
Please, tell us from the beginning.
She says that she's been taking care of young Rachel White for her daughter, Cora, because Cora had to return to work.
But they need some help in caring for this child. So they place an ad in a newspaper asking for babysitters.
Hi.
Hi,
Sharon.
Sharon Sanchez. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So glad you could come today.
She appears to be well-dressed. She's very polite. She is Hispanic, but speaks English perfectly.
When you have somebody like this who has obviously planned this abduction out, they give a phony name and give a phony telephone number. They don't want to be tracked down.
Can you describe her for us?
She had red highlights in her hair.
Did you notice anything strange about her?
Absolutely nothing. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Then, in an instant, baby Rachel was gone.
Oh my God, what are you doing? Stop! Where are you going with my baby?
She sees a silver sedan with Texas license plates.
And the car leaves at a high rate of speed down the street to the west.
The license plate, were you able to make out any of the digits?
It was really muddy. I should have never given Rachel to her.
You had no way of knowing.
He's right. And don't worry, we will find this woman and bring your granddaughter home safe.
But Kenda realizes they may be making a promise they can't keep.
A Hispanic female, black hair with red highlights and well-dressed. That fits maybe 10,000 women in Colorado Springs.
Adding to Kenda's concern, this kidnapper isn't following the typical playbook.
There's no phone call of any kind coming to this family. So then you get very fearful. If this is not a ransom demand, then what is it?
In fact, CSPD is already conducting a citywide search for Rachel and her kidnapper.
We're putting out the information to everybody with a badge and a gun in El Paso County and the state of Colorado, the airport police, bus stations, Amtrak stations, every place.
When you're looking at a stranger abduction of a 4-week-old child, any hour that goes by and that child's not found puts that child in more and more danger of never being found.
When your daughter Cora comes in, we'll all go downtown and we'll have you do a composite sketch of the woman. Could you do that? Let's go inside.
Ma'am, the officer will stay with you right now.
In the meantime, investigators head inside Cora's home, desperate for clues.
Amy, how we doing in there?
Well, we're not finished yet, but we haven't found anything. There's no prints on the doorknob, there's no hair, no nothing.
The grandmother said she brought a resume in with her. Maybe we can get something off that.
Haven't found it yet, sir.
She was very meticulous in how she did it. She probably didn't touch a whole lot of things in the house, because if she had left some evidentiary stuff there, then it would have helped us tremendously.
Looks like the baby mother's arrived.
God, if that was one of my kids, I don't know what I would do.
My mother called me and I felt like I had just been thrown into, like a tidal wave went over me and I couldn't hear and I couldn't breathe, but I didn't blame her.
After giving Cora and Evelyn a moment to commiserate, the detectives begin questioning them for leads on potential kidnappers.
Cora?
We know this is a difficult time for you, but we have to find your daughter as soon as possible. And to do that, we have to ask you a few questions.
I understand.
Rachel's father, is he in the picture?
Yes, well, not really.
What does that mean? Not really. She goes on to explain that she had met a man whose name is James, but there's a problem.
Okay, but?
Jim's married.
It was difficult to explain my personal life only because at that time I wanted them to look for my daughter. And I felt like it was just wasting so much time because none of that mattered.
His wife, Becky, found out about us. But, okay, look, what has this got to do with anything? My baby is out there somewhere. Shouldn't we be looking for her?
Ma'am, I give you my word. Right now, half the patrol division's out looking for Rachel. But in the meantime, it's my job and Sergeant Sapp's job to try and figure this out.
Okay.
So what happened when Becky found out?
Hello? You think I don't know? Excuse me?
Do you think I'm stupid? You stay away from my husband, you horrible bitch!
Cora! What, you didn't know he was married? Cora!
As soon as Cora realized it was Becky at the front door, she just slammed the door and refused to talk to her.
I couldn't handle all of that, so I broke it off with Jim and I left Canyon City.
Cora decides that she's going to move to Colorado Springs and let the affair die a natural death by her absence.
But then I missed him and he started coming to see me here in the Springs. And then I got pregnant and I told him I wanted to keep the baby.
And he didn't want you to?
No, he was supportive.
What about the wife? Does she know about the baby?
I don't know.
Kenda considers the possibility that Jim's scorned wife, Becky, may be somehow involved in this kidnapping.
What if Becky decides revenge is her motivation? Everything else is in the back burner until we find this baby. We have a kidnapped 4-week-old child that was a product of an affair with a married man. What if their wife decides to get even?
So you got to think right away that we have to put Becky at the top of our suspect list at this point.
So what does Becky look like?
She's white, blonde. I mean, she's not Hispanic, so she couldn't be the woman that took Rachel.
But just because Becky doesn't resemble the suspect doesn't mean she might not be involved in the abduction.
You know, when people go off that edge and their thinking becomes, you know what, I am just going to hire somebody to get a hold of that baby, and then it will go away.
I'll speak to Becky. Can you and your detectives speak with Jim?
Absolutely. Does Jim know what happened to Rachel yet?
Yeah, I called Jim right after my mom called me. He's on his way here now to see me.
And I'll stay here and wait for him.
Good, thank you.
Want to step back inside?
Once Jim Chase arrives, Kenda takes him to police headquarters to learn more about his romantic relationships, both with Cora Abbott and his wife, Becky.
Look, Jim, I'll get straight to the point. You're a married man. So how did things start with Cora?
It's been on again, off again. Things were not good with my wife, Becky. And then one night I bumped into Cora. I hadn't seen her in years. The first time I met Cora, she was 13. It was my first job as a teacher at her school.
Seriously?
Well, nothing happened. She was just a student. But then 10 years later, when she was 23, I ran into her again. So kind of got distracted.
Mr. Chase, sorry, is that you?
Yes, I'm sorry. Do I know you?
Oh, yeah, I'm Cora. I went to Washington Junior High when you taught there.
Oh my God, Cora. Wow. Yeah, of course I remember you. How are you?
Good. Well, I just recognized you, so I wanted to say hi.
I'm glad you did.
But you were a married man at that point.
Yeah.
So how long have you been seeing each other?
4 years.
What about your wife? Did she know what's going on?
Yeah, Becky found out, not the way I wanted.
Hello? Becky, you need to know something.
Who is this?
It doesn't matter. It's about your husband.
An anonymous phone call was made to his wife, informing her that her husband was having an affair with Cora.
What happened after that?
Things got bad, but ultimately Becky forgave me. We didn't want to break up the family, so I ended it with Cora.
They had somehow come to peace over this, and it helped enormously that Cora moved away from Canyon City and out of view and out of contact.
But according to Jim, that wasn't the end of his and Cora's affair.
I couldn't stay away. I tried. I begged her to take me back, and that's when she got pregnant.
Look, Mr. Chase, I need to know, does your wife Becky know about the baby?
Yeah, Becky knows.
An hour's drive away in Canyon City, Sergeant Robert Sapp is already getting Becky's side of the story.
Mrs. Chase, I'm here because we were investigating the kidnapping of a baby this morning. The infant is 4 weeks old and we know who the father is.
Oh, really? Well, I know who the father is too. My lousy bastard husband. He just told me this morning.
You mean you just found out?
She says when this crime occurred, it forced the father and husband to admit that there was a child and it was his.
About an hour ago, he just called me up and told me everything. I knew he was still seeing that woman. I knew it.
Forgive me for being blunt, but did you have anything to do with the kidnapping of this baby?
What? No. Of course not. I just found out about this morning.
Becky is adamant she didn't learn of the baby's existence until after the kidnapping. Sergeant Sapp doesn't get the sense that Becky is lying.
We have to make the decisions whether to eliminate somebody or to make them a person of interest.
Becky had no knowledge of the existence of a baby until the kidnapping had taken place, and Jim felt forced to tell her that a child existed and it was his. That fact alone eliminates Becky as a suspect.
Later that day, as officers continue scouring Colorado Springs for signs of baby Rachel, Sergeant Sapp and Kenda gather detectives to review the case.
We're running out of time, people. What are the facts telling us?
Well, we've eliminated anyone that knew Cora the baby. And whoever this Sharon Sanchez is came prepared.
She comes here with a false identity. She obscures the license plates in her car so the numbers can't be read. This was a planned event.
There's still no ransom note.
I don't like this at all.
Stranger abductions are the point to where we don't know what's going to happen. This child could be taken and killed at a later date. This child could be taken and sold on the market.
If a child is taken for the purposes of sale, there's less than a 1% chance it'll ever be found. My greatest fear in this case was that this was happening.
I was terrified that I would never, ever get to hold her again. Because I thought maybe she was being kidnapped to be sold. I knew that our chances of getting her back were very slim if we didn't get her back soon.
What becomes so serious about that is it's a speed event. They move them across borders, get them away from where we're going to be looking. So that's making my stomach turn over.
We've got all the transit hubs covered, but we can't check every car that's leaving the state of Colorado.
Yeah, our best bet is the public. I'll reach out to the press. I'll see if we can get this composite sketch of the kidnapper on the evening news.
We'll see if Cora can do the interview on air.
All right, let's get to work.
I think Joe called our assignment editor. So that kind of set everybody into motion. In this situation, truly a life hangs in the balance.
I was told by the police department that I needed to plead for her return as quickly as I could and as often as I could.
We have the mother, Cora Abbott, with us today, and she would like to say a few words.
Sharon, if you can hear me out there, please, find it in your heart. It's not too late. Please, I just need my baby back.
It was difficult. I was still in shock, but I was able to plead with her to please return her to me. That, you know, she needs her family and to please not hurt her.
The public response to Cora Abbott's emotional appeal is swift, and within hours, detectives have their first bona fide lead.
We have a pizza delivery man who says he delivers a pizza to Sharon Sanchez, the name given by our perpetrator. Oh, my, my, my. We have the kidnapping of a little baby, and everybody is absolutely on edge over this. Our first thought was that this child was taken to be sold on the black market.
All I could think of was, where was Rachel right now? Is she okay? Is she crying? Is she sleeping? Is she eating? I prayed. I prayed all the time.
Now, Officer John Taylor is taking a statement from a pizza delivery man who claims to have come face to face with the kidnapper.
So what can you tell us?
Well, I saw on the news about that missing baby before my shift last night, and then on one of my deliveries, I went to this house.
1725, right?
Yeah.
I already wrote you a check here.
She seems nervous, and she wants him off her front porch quickly, and he therefore believes that this woman is the one who's kidnapped this child.
So she wrote you a check?
Yeah, and that's another thing. The name on the check was like Sanchez or Sanchez. It was something like that. It was definitely Hispanic.
Okay.
Kenda considers the viability of the claim.
You don't ever fault the public for wanting to try to help, but you have to make a decision when you're receiving thousands of tips. You have to decide what shows some promise and what doesn't.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you for coming in. You did the right thing letting us know.
Yeah, no problem.
Come this way, I'll take you out.
Hey, you mind if I use your phone?
Yes, sir.
We will send 2 detectives over to the pizza lady to see what her story is.
When they arrive at the residence, detectives make another discovery that suggests this lead might be legitimate.
Hey, hold on. Look at this.
What do you got?
Well, the report says suspect got away in a silver car. Texas plates, though.
Could have changed them out.
It's possible.
Does that mean anything? Maybe. Go knock on the door, that's what means something. Who's in this house?
Good evening, ma'am. We're with the Colorado Springs Police Department, investigating the kidnapping of a baby.
Yes, I heard on the news. What does this have to do with me?
Is your name Sharon Sanchez?
No, it's Karen Chavez.
Ma'am, is there a baby in there right now?
Yes, my daughter. Would you like to see her?
If you'd be so kind, please.
All right, give me a second. It's my daughter, 8 months old.
So Karen Chavez introduces the officers to her child. So either this kid was able to age by eating pizza, or it's not the one.
Ma'am, we're sorry for the interruption. We just have to check every lead.
Understandable.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
With the clock still ticking and baby Rachel nowhere in sight, police amp up their search efforts.
It's fast moving. Information comes in, information goes out. You gotta figure out what's right or I used to call it chaos with a referee.
It's been 48 hours since the abduction of Rachel White. Police are still continuing the search, but there has been no signs yet of the 4-week-old baby.
It became very difficult, and I was beginning to think we were never gonna see her.
Somebody lives next door to this person. Somebody works with this person. Somebody in our city knows her and has seen this baby. So who is that? I don't know.
As the days went by and he was working essentially 24 every day and getting angrier and more frustrated that nothing was breaking. There was no place to go.
I was very concerned that this may fall to homicide if we didn't resolve it.
You know, the longer the child is not found, the farther physically they can be taken away, the more hours they're literally in danger.
I remember asking God that if she's not okay, that if she's being harmed in any way, to take her. Because I did not want her to suffer.
Then, on Monday, February 22nd, more than 72 hours after baby Rachel's abduction, there's finally a break in the case.
Sure, we got someone just came in.
Let me guess, the milkman this time.
No, this guy's legit. Air Force Major.
Really?
Yeah.
Send him in, please.
When you get a call that a major wants to talk to you about this particular kidnapping, that he may have pertinent information, you darn sure want to sit down and talk to him right away.
Detectives, Major Bruce Jagger, U.S. Air Force. My commanding officer insisted I come see you guys right away.
Joe Kenda. That's Bob Sapp.
Nice to meet you, Major. Please have a seat. So what's on your mind?
Well, I may know something about that missing baby.
Really?
Oh, Major, you have my undivided attention. Please continue. So this major has arrived and announced that he has information that pertains to the kidnapping and disappearance of Rachel Ann White.
Just looking at Thomas.
Well, there's a tradition in the Air Force. When a baby's being born,
Major Jager reports that when one of your enlisted men has a new baby, it is the custom for the commanding officer and his wife to offer their congratulations and bring a small gift for the child.
there's a captain under my command, Paul Rentz.
Major, here you go, sir. Take one.
Does this mean what I think it means?
You bet it does, sir. I'm a dad. My wife had a little girl this morning.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The major thought that was somewhat odd because he had never heard Captain Rentz ever mention that his wife was pregnant.
So yesterday, Sunday, my wife and I went to Captain Rentz's home, to honor their tradition and to see the baby, of course.
So Major Jagger and his wife showed up unannounced.
Major, is everything okay?
Hello, Captain. We just wanted to come by and see the new recruit.
Can't let her into this world without an Air Force welcome.
Thank you both so much. Won't you come in?
What is it, Paul?
Maritza, this is my supervisor, Major Jagger, and his wife.
Hi, I'm Janet.
Hi, what can we do for you?
Well, I was just telling your husband here we came by to see the baby and we wanted to greet our newest Air Force family member.
Well, she's not. She's asleep.
One excuse after another as to why the baby can't be seen.
Oh, come on. We drove all this way.
Well, I
Of course you can see her, Major. Please, come on in.
His wife was very strange. She was reluctant to let us in. Then we saw the baby, and that's what brought me here to you guys.
Now this really piques my interest.
So what was it about this baby that set you off?
Well, it's not me, really. It was my wife.
She's beautiful.
You're gonna wake her up. Yeah, you're gonna wake her up. You're gonna wake her up. Thank you.
She's so pretty.
Captain, it was wonderful to meet your wife and daughter.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, it was a pleasure.
After Major Jagger and his wife leave the house, she makes a startling observation.
I don't know what Captain Rentz told you, but that is not a newborn baby.
She says that baby in that crib was not born on Friday. This is Sunday. That baby would be 3 days old, and that baby's not 3 days old. It's much older than that.
Well, I thought that was impossible. We got home, we saw the news and saw that a baby had been kidnapped, and that's what brought me here to you guys.
Do you have an address for the Rentzes?
Yeah, of course.
Sergeants Kenda and Sapp waste no time in investigating this promising tip.
They have a 2-car garage, and on the left side is a small silver car with Texas plates with the numbers covered with mud. Wow.
It all adds up, and the speed picks up because now we've got something.
Excuse me, Captain Rentz?
Yes?
We're here to see you and your wife. Is she home?
What's this about?
May we come in? And please get your wife.
Sure. You'll wait right here. I'll go get my wife.
Looking at Maritza Rentz, investigators get the feeling they may have finally found baby Rachel's kidnapper.
She's a perfect match to the composite drawing. She is a nervous wreck. Is this the person who claimed to be Sharon Sanchez? Maritza Rentz looks as if she could be a photograph of the drawing. We say to her, so you had a baby on Friday. Where'd you have this baby?
Penrose Community Hospital.
And who delivered her?
Dr. Cohen.
Do you have a birth certificate?
Of course I do.
Can we see it?
This is ridiculous. Why? I don't want to see my baby's birth certificate.
Please.
The birthday is the 19th, Friday, a few days ago, 9:41 in the morning.
It was an authentic piece of paper, but it wasn't a birth certificate. I got 4 kids. I know what birth certificates look like. It just didn't add up.
This whole thing's forged.
What are you talking about?
We want to see the baby.
No, she's sleeping.
That wasn't a request, man. Get the baby. Now.
We're not going to go unless that child comes with us. And we're not going to go unless we end up arresting somebody for this crime in that home.
Let me see her.
You're gonna wake her up.
I need to see her now.
When I looked at the child, I knew right then it was older than what a newborn would be. It didn't have the typical Band-Aid over the navel part.
Hey, Bill, the storm's gone.
Where'd you get this baby?
She's my baby.
Well, this is Rachel White. She's going home to her mother.
She didn't put up a big fight. My opinion was that she knew the gig was up.
No.
Well, Captain Rance was dumbfounded, and you guys are trying to say that this baby is not our baby?
This is crazy.
He actually seems confused. You think?
They didn't know? Let's see what he says.
Police take Maritza and Paul Rentz downtown and quickly notify Cora Abbott that they found her baby girl.
I was in the car driving to another interview to plead for Rachel. Back then, we didn't have cell phones, so I had a pager.
They found her.
But it's kind of like getting a text. You don't get any inflection. So at first I was excited. And then I was fearful because I was like, oh my God, she didn't say if the baby was dead or alive. And then I got another page right away from the police saying something to the effect of, come down right away, we have Rachel. And then I knew at that point that she was okay. And turned around and went straight to the police department.
20 minutes later, Cora is reunited with a daughter she feared she'd never see again.
So Sergeant Snap, he was just walking towards me, and he had her in his arms. And he just handed her to me. And everybody was crying and cheering. And I couldn't believe at that moment that I was standing there holding her. It seemed so surreal.
It was a very touching moment when Cora let out a shriek and said, "That's my baby, that's my little girl." Yes, it is. And here you go.
But while mother and daughter have been reunited, there are still several unanswered questions surrounding the case.
Maritza Rentz will be charged with kidnapping, but we're still not sure about Paul.
What is going on here? Why have you taken my baby?
No, Paul, it's not your baby. It's Rachel White.
Impossible. My wife was pregnant. I'm telling you the truth. Why are you trying to take my daughter away?
Paul, it was a fraud. All of it. We checked with the hospital. Maritza didn't give birth.
You spoke with Dr. Cohen?
He'd neither seen her to be a wife before?
You know, it was weird. For most of the pregnancy, she wouldn't let me see her.
Does he know and doesn't want to believe? Is he a criminal? Or is he just a fool? That's the issue.
I could swear at first she was starting the show. A few months in, she wouldn't let me see her naked. She would always make excuses.
So no sex?
No, nothing.
She explained to him pretty early on in the pregnancy that they could no longer have sex. It wasn't healthy for the unborn child.
I love you.
I want to feel my baby kick.
Stop it. Don't touch me. Not now. I told you it hurts. It's very sensitive.
She would get really angry with him and tell him to stop that. She didn't want him feeling her belly.
Things hadn't really been that good between us, so I didn't want to push her, get her upset, you know, keep her happy. So I kept quiet.
He told his story. Was it believable? Not particularly. But could it be true? Yeah, it could be true. Maybe he's just odd.
With Paul's culpability still in question, detectives decide it's time to speak to Maritza.
So, Maritza, our concern is with your husband. We need to know, did he help you do this?
No, he didn't know. It was all me. I did it by myself.
At the time when she said that my husband knew anything about this, the question is, how did he not know?
I don't see how that's possible.
But at first, I really was pregnant until my second trimester.
She goes on to say she lost the baby and decided she was unwilling to tell her husband.
And then she went through this elaborate story. I put pillows under me. And of course I asked her, well, would you go out? Yeah, but I always had a pill or something to show that I would appear to be pregnant.
Look, Maritza, I want to know why. Why did you do this?
Just couldn't see any other way. My marriage was on the rocks, and after I got pregnant, everything was so much better. So after the miscarriage, I just couldn't go back to how things were.
According to Maritza, as the end of her would-be pregnancy approached, she was faced with a choice: come clean to her husband, or find a baby she could pass off as her own.
She is reading newspaper ads, asking for child care people. Her difficulty, she tells us, is that initially, the kids were too old.
That is until Maritza came across Cora Abbott's ad, and her twisted plan was born.
She obscures the numbers on her license plates with mud. She creates a false identity.
Hi. Hi. Sharon?
Yes, Sharon Sanchez. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And she responds for an interview at the home.
Maritza says that once she was face to face with the baby, she got cold feet.
I was scared. I didn't think I could do it, but then it was like a miracle.
She wasn't going to take the child, but when the phone rang, the opportunity presented itself.
I'm interviewing you as a babysitter. Well, can I call you back in a few minutes?
It was as if God put her in my hands.
Oh, God didn't put it there, Maritza. You did.
Maritza claimed that once Rachel's abduction was complete, there was one more person to pull into her tangled web.
Hello?
Hey, Paul. I just came back from the hospital. I had the baby. It's a girl.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'll be there as soon as I can.
He apparently is not that confused by this. Most people go to the store on a Friday morning. You go have a baby and come home with it? And I'm finding about this now? That would be my reaction if I were Captain Rentz.
Okay. I love you so much.
I love you too.
She admits to all of it. She admits to all of it. She planned it, she carried it out, she has this baby, and she had no intention of ever returning the child, ever.
Maritza Rentz's guilt is undeniable, But investigators still aren't sure if her husband Paul was truly as innocent as he claimed.
Being stupid is not against the law, but leaving your wife is also not a criminal act, even when her story is unbelievable.
My belief is that he was aware of it, but we could not establish that for sure.
We didn't think we had enough to prove anything against him. And the ultimate result in a courtroom was he was found not guilty.
Maritza Ratz pleads guilty to second-degree kidnapping, but the judge decides she won't spend any time behind bars.
I thought it was a joke. She got off with, I guess it was a claim of mental insanity.
Maritza Ratz was granted probation and was confined in a mental institution for 1 year, a very, very limited punishment for the enormity of the offense.
Rachel today is a very beautiful, strong woman, and I'm so proud of her. She's come a long way with her life. She's gone through college, she's married, she's happy. I don't know that I could have asked anything more from her.
Homicide cannot be undone. The person has died. They're not returning because they cannot. We were able to provide Cora with actual closure, physical closure. What a rare moment. Closure doesn't exist in my world. One time and one time only, it did.
The phone rang just after midnight, the kind of ring that slices through sleep and leaves a room feeling instantly colder, and on the other end was a voice from a quiet Ohio town saying a name that had not been spoken out loud in nearly 3 decades, a name buried in old police files, yellowing newspaper clippings, and the collective memory of a community that had learned to live with an unanswered question. Ohio, 1994. A year remembered for snow-heavy winters, factory layoffs, and a murder that never made sense. A cold case before anyone in town knew what that phrase would come to mean. The night everything stopped, the clocks kept ticking, but something else froze in place, and it stayed that way for years. It began on a residential street where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen, a row of modest houses with trimmed lawns and porch lights that clicked on at dusk like a shared ritual. The kind of neighborhood where people waved without knowing each other's names, where silence felt normal, comforting even. On one of those porches lived a woman who kept her curtains half-drawn and her habits predictable, the sort of person who could disappear without immediately triggering alarm. She had a routine. Morning coffee. A short drive to work. Groceries on Fridays. Church on Sundays. And then, one ordinary evening, she didn't come home. At first, it was brushed off. A missed call. A car trouble excuse waiting to happen. But the porch light stayed off that night, and the next morning the mailbox was full. By the second day, neighbors noticed the absence, the wrongness of it settling in like a draft through a cracked window. Police were called. A welfare check turned into something heavier. The house was neat. Too neat. No signs of a struggle. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Just a purse on the kitchen table and keys missing from the hook by the door. A quiet house holding its breath. The first headline was cautious, almost polite. Local woman reported missing. The second used stronger language. Mysterious disappearance shocks community. By the end of the week, reporters were using words that carried weight. Cold case. Vanished without a trace. Investigators fanned out, knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. When was the last time you saw her? Did you hear anything unusual? Anyone hanging around who didn't belong? The answers blurred together. No. Nothing. She was quiet. She kept to herself. They searched the nearby woods, the riverbanks, abandoned lots on the edge of town where rusted cars sat like skeletons. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the air, scattering hope and dread in equal measure. Nothing turned up. Not a shoe. Not a scrap of clothing. The absence itself became the evidence, and it wasn't enough. Inside the police station, detectives pinned photos to corkboards, drew lines between names, timelines scribbled in marker that smudged under tired hands. They talked about opportunity. About motive. About the unsettling fact that whoever was responsible had known how to leave no mess behind. This wasn't a crime of rage, they said. It was controlled. Deliberate. That realization made everyone in town look at each other a little differently. Then there was the neighbor. He lived 2 houses down, a man whose name appeared in the notes early on for reasons so ordinary they almost didn't matter. He'd been home that night. He always was. Retired early. Kept his yard immaculate. Helped shovel snow for elderly residents in the winter. A quiet presence, barely noticed until suddenly he was everywhere in the investigation, his name circled, underlined, then crossed out again. He said he hadn't seen her. Said he went to bed early. His alibi was solitude, and in a town like this, that was normal. Police interviewed him anyway, sitting across a metal table in a room that smelled faintly of stale coffee. He answered calmly, hands folded, voice steady. No cracks. No contradictions. When they asked if he'd ever argued with her, he shook his head. When they asked if he'd ever been inside her house, he paused just long enough for it to be noted, then said no. The pause was logged. So was everything else. And then, with nothing concrete to hold him there, they let him walk out. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The searches slowed, then stopped. The case file thickened, then gathered dust. The missing woman's photo remained on a bulletin board by the station entrance, edges curling as seasons passed. The town adapted, as towns do. People stopped locking their doors quite so carefully. Children grew up. New families moved in, unaware of the story beneath their feet. But some things never fully settled. Rumors did what evidence could not. Whispers about a secret relationship. About debts. About a strange car seen idling too long on the street that night. Each tip sparked a brief flare of activity before dying out. Detectives changed. Budgets were cut. The case slipped into that cold, suspended state where it existed more as an idea than an active pursuit. Cold case. 2 words that sounded clinical, but carried years of frustration inside them. Every anniversary brought a short article in the local paper. Still no answers in 1994 disappearance. A quote from a retired officer. A line about the family's enduring pain. And always, somewhere in the comments, someone asking the same question. How does a person vanish in a town this small? How does no one see anything? The neighbor stayed. He aged in place, hair turning gray, movements slowing. He waved at newcomers, accepted casseroles when his wife passed away, became part of the background again. To most, he was just another quiet man in a quiet town. To a few, he was a shadow that never quite aligned with the light. Detectives who had worked the case remembered that pause in the interview, the way his eyes didn't quite meet theirs when certain questions were asked. But memory is not evidence, and suspicion alone cannot make an arrest. Years later, when forensic technology advanced and cold cases across the country were being reopened, Ohio 1994 was pulled from the shelf once more. Boxes were reopened. Evidence bags inspected. Old statements reread with fresh eyes. There was still nothing physical tying anyone to the disappearance. No body. No crime scene. Just a woman gone and a town that had learned to carry the weight of it quietly. Then, late one night, decades after the porch light first went dark, the phone rang again. A confession, the caller said. A neighbor. Quiet. Unassuming. A man no one was looking at anymore. The words traveled fast, lighting up the town with a familiar, unwelcome electricity. People stood in their kitchens listening to the news, hands frozen mid-motion, hearts racing with a mix of hope and dread. Was this it? Was this finally the answer? But confessions are strange things. They can be clear or riddled with holes, driven by guilt, fear, or a desire to be seen. As investigators prepared to listen, the town held its breath once more, the old question rising again from beneath years of silence. What really happened in Ohio in 1994? And whether the truth, after all this time, would finally be enough to end the cold case, or only deepen the mystery that had haunted them for so long. The confession didn't arrive with drama or spectacle, no flashing lights, no dramatic walk into a police station surrounded by cameras, just a phone call and a request to talk, a quiet voice asking if it was too late to tell the truth, and in a town trained by decades of disappointment, that single sentence carried more force than any siren ever could. Detectives who had long since moved on from Ohio 1994 felt the case snap back into focus, old instincts waking up as if no time had passed at all, and when the neighbor's name was confirmed, it spread through the department like an electrical current, disbelief mixed with something darker, something like dread, because if he was talking now, after all these years, there was a reason. They brought him in on a gray morning, the kind that drains color from everything it touches, and he walked through the station doors with the same careful steps he'd taken decades earlier, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes down, hands empty, no lawyer at his side, which alone set off alarms. Confessions without counsel are rare, and they are rarely simple. He sat in the interview room, the same one, the same table, though the paint on the walls had changed and the coffee was marginally better, and for a moment no one spoke, the silence thick, expectant, pressing in on all of them. When he began, it wasn't with an admission of violence. It was memory. He talked about the night she disappeared as if he were describing a dream he'd never been able to shake, his voice even, almost flat, describing the weather, the way the street looked under the glow of porch lights, how quiet everything felt. He said he'd seen her that evening, something he'd denied years earlier, said she was standing near her car, keys in hand, distracted, like she was waiting for someone or something. That detail alone caused heads to lift. It contradicted his original statement. A crack, finally, after all this time. Detectives let him talk. They always do. He said he approached her, just to say hello, just to ask how she was doing. He said she seemed nervous, that she glanced past him more than once. Then he paused, that same pause, longer this time, heavy with implication. He said she asked him a question he hadn't expected, something about whether he'd noticed anyone strange in the neighborhood lately. He said he told her no. He said that was the last time he saw her alive. The word alive hung in the room, unchallenged, but not accepted either. Investigators exchanged glances, pens hovering over notepads. He hadn't said what happened next, but he'd said enough to open doors that had been sealed for years. When they pressed him, gently at first, about why he'd lied before, he shrugged, a small, almost apologetic movement. Fear, he said. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't want trouble. He said he'd convinced himself that telling the truth would only make things worse. As the hours passed, his story shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that could be easily dismissed, but subtly, like a photograph slowly coming into focus only to blur again at the edges. He admitted he'd gone inside her house that night, something he'd denied outright in 1994. He said she'd invited him in, just for a minute, just to talk. The house, he said, was exactly as police had found it. No mess. No signs of struggle. He said they talked about nothing important. Work. Weather. The kind of conversation people have when they're avoiding something else. Then he said she received a phone call. He described the way her posture changed, the way her voice dropped, the way she turned slightly away from him as she spoke. He said she looked frightened. He said she told him she had to leave, that something had come up, and that she'd see him later. He said she walked him to the door, locked it behind him, and drove away. That was it. That was the confession, at least as he presented it. He knew more than he'd ever admitted, but he denied harming her. Denied following her. Denied knowing what happened next. Detectives leaned back in their chairs, the room suddenly feeling much smaller. A confession that wasn't a confession. Information that raised more questions than it answered. Why come forward now? Why admit to lying but stop short of admitting guilt? When asked that directly, his answer was quiet, almost lost in the hum of the fluorescent lights. He said he was tired. He said he didn't sleep anymore. He said the past had a way of getting louder when everything else goes quiet. Word of the interview leaked within hours. In a town where news still traveled faster by conversation than by internet, it didn't take long for speculation to explode. Some called him a monster hiding in plain sight. Others insisted he was just an old man looking for attention, or absolution, or both. The headlines were merciless. Quiet neighbor breaks silence in 1994 cold case. Confession reopens old wounds. Each article pulled the town back into a story it had tried, unsuccessfully, to forget. Investigators returned to the evidence with renewed urgency. They re-examined the house, photos spread across tables, looking for anything they'd missed, anything that matched his new account. They tracked phone records as best they could, though time had erased most of them. They revisited witness statements, searching for mentions of a call, a car, a stranger. A few neighbors recalled seeing headlights that night, a vehicle idling briefly before pulling away. None could say whose it was. None could place the neighbor behind the wheel. They searched again. Fields. Woods. Old properties now owned by different families who watched in uneasy silence as police tape went up for the first time in years. Cadaver dogs worked methodically, noses to the ground, handlers holding their breath with every alert that turned out to be nothing. Each failed search added weight to the question no one wanted to ask out loud. If he didn't do it, then who did? And if he did, where was the proof? As pressure mounted, the neighbor's story began to fray. Small inconsistencies appeared when he was asked to repeat details. Time shifted. The order of events changed. The phone call came before the conversation, then after. He corrected himself often, apologizing, blaming his memory, his age. Detectives documented everything, knowing that memory after decades is unreliable, but also knowing that deception often hides in the same places as confusion. They brought him back in for a second interview, then a third. Each time, he seemed smaller, more fragile, yet also strangely relieved, as if the act of talking itself was a release, regardless of where it led. When confronted with the possibility that his confession wasn't enough, that without physical evidence there could be no arrest, his reaction was unexpected. He nodded. He said he understood. He said the truth doesn't always bring justice. Sometimes it just brings noise. That sentence stayed with the detectives long after he left the room. The case teetered in a dangerous place, suspended between resolution and collapse. Prosecutors reviewed the file and hesitated. A confession without a body, without corroboration, without a clear admission of a crime, was a gamble. Defense attorneys would tear it apart. A trial could end in acquittal, slamming the door on the case forever. And so, once again, Ohio 1994 hovered on the edge of becoming something it had always been. A story without an ending. In the town, the tension was palpable. People argued in grocery store aisles, in church parking lots, on front porches late into the night. Some wanted an arrest, any arrest, just to put the nightmare to rest. Others feared the wrong ending was worse than none at all. And in the middle of it all was a woman still missing, still unaccounted for, her absence stretching across years like a scar that never healed. As winter crept in, mirroring the season when it had all begun, the investigation slowed once more, bogged down by uncertainty, by the limits of memory and evidence. The neighbor returned home, still free, still walking the same sidewalks, now under the weight of a town's gaze. And as the headlines faded again, one truth became impossible to ignore. The confession had not solved the cold case. It had only reopened it, exposing how little was truly known, and how some mysteries, once disturbed, refused to be put back to sleep. Silence returned to the town in stages, not all at once, like a storm moving off into the distance while the air remains heavy and charged. And after the neighbor walked back to his house for the last time under the watchful eyes of cameras and curious onlookers, people retreated indoors, curtains drawn a little tighter, conversations dropping to whispers again, because nothing unsettles a place quite like a truth that almost surfaces and then slips away. The cold case was open, technically, but it felt suspended, balanced on a knife edge where one wrong move could send it crashing into nothing. Inside the department, frustration set in. Detectives replayed the confession over and over, listening for emphasis, for emotion, for the places where his voice changed, where breath caught or slowed, because sometimes guilt leaves fingerprints in tone if not in evidence. They mapped his statements against what little was known, against old reports and photographs that smelled faintly of dust and time, and in doing so, something unsettling emerged. His version of events fit too well around the gaps. He never collided with the unknown. He flowed around it, neatly, as if instinctively avoiding the places where facts might contradict him. That raised another possibility, one no one liked to voice. What if he was telling a story built from years of rumor, headlines, and half-remembered details? What if he wasn't confessing, but performing? The idea hung in the air, uncomfortable, because it suggested something even darker than guilt. It suggested manipulation. That someone could step into a decades-old tragedy and reshape it for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. Investigators began to look not just at what he said, but when he said it. Why now? Why after years of silence, after the case had gone cold enough to be considered dead? They learned that his health had been failing. That he'd recently lost someone close. That mortality was no longer an abstract concept for him, but a presence sitting quietly at the edge of his days. Confessions born of fear are common, but so are confessions born of regret, and those two impulses can look dangerously similar. They also revisited the missing woman's life with a level of scrutiny that felt invasive even by police standards. Her finances. Her phone records, incomplete as they were. Her relationships. They found nothing sensational. No secret lovers. No criminal ties. Just a series of small, human complications. A disagreement with a coworker. A dispute with a contractor. A relative she hadn't spoken to in years. Each lead was followed, documented, then quietly closed again. The mystery refused to narrow. One detail from the neighbor's confession, however, refused to let go. The phone call. The idea that someone else had been involved, that she'd left her house in response to a voice on the other end of the line, introduced a new axis of uncertainty. If true, it meant the neighbor might be peripheral, a witness rather than a perpetrator. If false, it was a convenient way to redirect suspicion, to create a phantom suspect who could never be found. Detectives searched for corroboration. They tracked down old phone company employees, asked about record retention policies from the early 90s. The answers were discouraging. Most logs were long gone. Paper records destroyed. Digital archives non-existent. The past had erased its own trail. The only thing left was memory, and memory is a fragile witness. As weeks passed, the neighbor's behavior began to attract attention. He spoke to reporters despite being advised not to. He framed his involvement as cooperation, as a civic duty finally fulfilled. In interviews, he described himself as haunted, as a man who had lived too long with a secret that wasn't even his own. The language was careful. Always just shy of admission. Always leaning into ambiguity. To some, it sounded like guilt. To others, like theater. Public opinion fractured. Online forums dissected every word he'd spoken, every photograph ever taken of him. Amateur sleuths built timelines, pointed out inconsistencies, argued over whether his pauses meant deception or confusion. The case, once a quiet local tragedy, became a spectacle again, and that, too, felt wrong. The missing woman was turning into a symbol, a canvas for other people's need for resolution. Then a tip came in, the kind that reignites exhausted investigators despite years of disappointment. A former coworker claimed the woman had mentioned feeling watched in the weeks before her disappearance. Said she'd laughed it off at the time, but in hindsight it felt significant. The statement was vague, unprovable, but it aligned disturbingly well with the neighbor's claim that she'd been nervous that night. It suggested a threat that predated his involvement, a presence lurking just beyond the frame. Police widened their lens. They revisited the neighborhood as it had been in 1994, identifying who had lived where, who had since moved away, who had died. They tracked down names that had once been footnotes in the file, people who'd been interviewed briefly and then forgotten. Most remembered little. Some remembered too much, their stories altered by years of retelling. Each interview left detectives feeling like they were chasing reflections rather than facts. As momentum built, so did pressure from above. There was talk of closing the case again if no new evidence emerged. Of acknowledging the confession without acting on it. Of letting the story end in uncertainty. For detectives who had invested years of their careers into Ohio 1994, the idea was unbearable. They felt closer than ever, yet just as far away. The neighbor, sensing the shift, changed his tone. In a private conversation with investigators, he hinted that there was more he hadn't said. That certain details were too difficult to talk about. When pressed, he retreated, citing stress, confusion, the weight of public scrutiny. The promise of more dangled in front of them like a mirage. Every time they reached for it, it dissolved. Meanwhile, the town lived in a state of low-level tension. Parents watched their children more closely. Old residents revisited memories they'd suppressed. New residents learned, perhaps for the first time, that the street they lived on had a story beneath its quiet surface. The past was no longer past. It was present, demanding attention. One evening, as detectives reviewed the case yet again, a realization began to take shape, subtle but profound. The confession, incomplete as it was, had changed the investigation in one irreversible way. It had shifted the center of gravity. No longer was the question simply what happened to her. It was now also why someone would step forward after so long, offering just enough truth to destabilize everything, but not enough to resolve it. That question led them down a darker path, toward the possibility that the neighbor's role, whatever it was, might not fit neatly into the categories they were used to. Not innocent. Not fully guilty. Something in between. A witness who failed to act. A man who knew more than he ever admitted. Or someone using the cold case as a way to confront his own fear of being forgotten. As the investigation entered its next phase, the sense of unease deepened. The case was no longer just about a missing woman in 1994. It was about memory, about guilt, about the ways people reshape the past to survive the present. And somewhere within that tangled web, the truth still waited, patient, elusive, refusing to be pinned down, reminding everyone involved that some cold cases do not grow warmer with time. They grow sharper, cutting deeper the closer you think you are to the answer. The investigation entered a phase that felt less like progress and more like excavation, a careful peeling back of layers that had hardened over decades, and with each layer removed, the air grew heavier, the edges of the story sharper, because what lay beneath was no longer just a disappearance, but a network of small choices, silences, and missed moments that together had allowed a woman to vanish in plain sight. Detectives stopped looking for a single, dramatic revelation and started hunting for pressure points, places where lives intersected in ways that might explain why this case had resisted closure for so long. They focused on the days leading up to the disappearance, reconstructing them hour by hour, minute by minute, not as they had once done with urgency and hope, but now with the cold precision of people who understood how easily the truth can hide in routine. They learned that the woman had requested time off work unexpectedly. That she'd closed her bank account days before she vanished, withdrawing a modest amount of cash that was never recovered. It wasn't enough to suggest a planned escape, but it was enough to complicate the narrative. People don't usually prepare to disappear halfway. This detail had been overlooked in 1994, buried under more immediate concerns, but now it took on new weight. Investigators wondered whether she'd sensed something coming, whether fear had driven her to make small, protective moves. They revisited conversations with coworkers, who now recalled her being distracted, preoccupied, flinching at sudden noises. One remembered her joking about needing a vacation, then quickly changing the subject when pressed. Jokes, they knew, often mask the things people are most afraid to say. The neighbor's story was laid over this timeline like tracing paper, and the misalignments became harder to ignore. His claim of a casual conversation clashed with the picture of a woman under strain. His insistence that nothing happened inside the house felt increasingly hollow against the idea that she'd been preparing for something, or someone. Detectives questioned whether his role was more active than he admitted, or whether he had witnessed something he'd never been able to process, let alone report. They brought him back in again, this time with a different approach. No accusations. No confrontations. Just quiet, open-ended questions designed to let him talk himself into corners. They asked about his own life in 1994, about stressors, about his relationship with his wife at the time, about the rhythms of his days. Slowly, a picture emerged of a man deeply isolated, resentful of change, intensely observant of his surroundings. He knew his neighbors' routines better than they knew his. When asked directly why he'd been watching her that night, he bristled, then softened. He said it wasn't watching. It was noticing. He said he noticed everything. That statement lingered. Noticing is passive. Watching is intentional. The line between them is thin, and in a case like this, it mattered. The investigation widened again, this time beyond the neighborhood. Detectives looked at the woman's commute, the places she stopped regularly, the grocery store she favored, the gas station she used out of habit. They found an employee from one of those places who remembered her vaguely, remembered a man who sometimes waited in the parking lot, smoking, leaning against a car that didn't seem to belong to anyone local. The description was indistinct, frustratingly so, but it introduced a new element. An outsider. Or someone who wanted to appear as one. This possibility unsettled the town more than the idea of the neighbor ever had. A familiar threat can be contained psychologically. An unknown one cannot. If someone had been watching her beyond the street, then the danger had been broader, more diffuse. It raised the possibility that the neighbor's confession was a deflection, intentional or not, drawing attention away from a figure who had slipped through the cracks. Investigators attempted to identify the car. Old registration records were combed through. Tips poured in from people convinced they'd seen something similar years ago. Every lead dissolved under scrutiny. The car remained a ghost, like so many other elements of the case. Pressure from the media intensified. The narrative had shifted from quiet neighbor to tangled mystery, and that complexity did not translate easily into headlines. Sound bites replaced nuance. The neighbor was portrayed alternately as a villain and a victim of circumstance. The woman, once at the center of the story, risked being overshadowed by speculation. Detectives felt the weight of that imbalance acutely. They were not chasing a story. They were chasing an answer. Behind the scenes, disagreements emerged. Some investigators believed the neighbor was lying by omission, protecting himself from a truth he could not face. Others believed he was telling what he thought was the truth, shaped by decades of guilt over inaction rather than action. The distinction mattered legally, but emotionally, it offered little comfort. Either way, his silence in 1994 had helped the case go cold. As winter deepened, so did the sense of urgency. Time was not an ally. Witnesses were aging. Memories were eroding. Evidence, if it still existed at all, was degrading in places no one could predict. Detectives pushed for one final, comprehensive search, targeting areas that had once been inaccessible or overlooked. Old wells. Abandoned properties now reclaimed by nature. The search was exhausting, and once again, it yielded nothing. The failure hit harder this time. There was no sense of closure, no clear next step. Just the same question, echoing louder with each attempt to answer it. Where did she go? The neighbor watched from his porch as police vehicles passed by, his expression unreadable. He declined further interviews. His health deteriorated, or so he claimed. Lawyers appeared where there had been none before. The tone changed. Cooperation gave way to caution. Whatever had driven him to speak initially seemed to have run its course. In the town, patience wore thin. Some residents demanded charges, any charges, arguing that the confession alone was enough. Others feared a miscarriage of justice, worried that desperation would lead to the wrong ending. The debate was fierce, emotional, and deeply personal. This was not an abstract case. It was their town, their history, their unresolved trauma. As the investigation stalled yet again, a quiet realization settled in among the detectives. The truth, if it was ever found, might not come in the form they expected. It might not be a body, or a weapon, or a single, decisive confession. It might be fragmented, scattered across years and people, impossible to assemble into a neat conclusion. And in that realization was something deeply unsettling. The possibility that Ohio 1994 would remain suspended forever between knowing and not knowing, a cold case defined not by what had been discovered, but by what continued to slip away, just out of reach, as if the past itself were resisting every attempt to drag it into the light. By the time spring arrived, it felt less like a season and more like a deadline, an unspoken understanding that whatever answers still existed were slipping further into the ground with each passing day, and the investigation took on a sharper, almost desperate edge, because cold cases do not simply fade, they calcify, hardening around the unknown until even the most careful pressure risks shattering what little remains. Ohio 1994 was no longer just unsolved. It was unstable. Detectives turned inward, scrutinizing their own work from the original investigation, replaying decisions made by people who were younger then, less cautious, more willing to trust what felt normal. They asked themselves whether the case had gone cold because of a lack of evidence, or because of a failure to recognize danger when it wore a familiar face. In doing so, they reopened old wounds, not just in the file, but within the department itself. They discovered that in the weeks after the disappearance, several tips had been logged but never fully pursued. One involved a late-night argument overheard near the woman's house, dismissed at the time as a domestic dispute that could not be verified. Another described a car leaving the street at high speed shortly after midnight, its headlights off, an odd detail that had been deemed unreliable. Back then, resources had been limited, priorities shifting, and without a body, urgency had been rationed. Now, those choices felt heavier, harder to justify. The neighbor's name appeared in those early tips more often than anyone remembered. Not as a suspect, but as a presence. Someone seen outside at unusual hours. Someone who asked too many questions afterward. Someone who seemed overly invested in the search while offering little of substance. None of it had been enough to act on then. Together, years later, it painted a more troubling picture. Detectives brought those rediscovered details to him in a controlled, quiet setting. They didn't accuse. They presented a witness statement. A timeline discrepancy. A question left unanswered. His reaction was subtle but telling. His breathing changed. His eyes darted briefly toward the door. He asked for a break. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted. The calm he'd worn like armor cracked, just slightly. He admitted to being outside that night more than he'd previously said. He admitted to hearing raised voices, though he claimed he couldn't make out words. He said he hadn't thought it mattered. That it felt intrusive to insert himself into someone else's life. The explanation rang hollow. People don't forget arguments that happen on their own street, not when a woman disappears hours later. Investigators pressed harder now, asking why his story continued to evolve. Why each version seemed to move closer to the center of the night without ever landing there. He responded with frustration, then anger, then something that looked like fear. He said they were trying to turn him into a villain because the case needed one. He said he was tired of carrying a weight that wasn't his to bear. That phrase, carrying a weight, echoed through the room. It suggested responsibility without action, knowledge without intervention. Detectives wondered whether the truth they were circling was not a murder committed by the neighbor, but a failure that had allowed one to happen. A moment when he could have stepped in, called for help, done something, and chose instead to stay silent. That kind of guilt can fester for decades. At the same time, another thread of the investigation gained traction. The argument reported years earlier was re-examined, and this time, the voice descriptions were compared to known individuals in the woman's life. One name surfaced repeatedly, a former acquaintance she'd cut ties with months before disappearing. He lived outside town, worked irregular hours, and had a history of volatile behavior. He had been questioned briefly in 1994 and released. Now, with the neighbor's mention of raised voices, he returned to the center of the frame. Detectives tracked him down. He was older, defensive, angry at being dragged back into a past he claimed had nothing to do with him. He denied seeing her that night, denied any recent contact, but his alibi was weak, relying on memory alone. When confronted with the possibility that others had heard an argument, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. He said people heard what they wanted to hear. The re-emergence of this second suspect complicated everything. It split focus, divided resources, and reignited debates within the department. Was the neighbor a red herring, a witness whose guilt stemmed from silence, or was he a careful manipulator who had waited decades to test the system? And if someone else had been involved, why step forward now? Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. The idea that multiple men might be tied to the disappearance fed a growing sense of unease. The case no longer felt contained to one street, one house. It felt systemic, a failure of vigilance that could happen anywhere. Trust eroded. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion, replaying old interactions in their minds, searching for signs they might have missed. As pressure mounted, prosecutors demanded clarity. They needed a path forward, a theory strong enough to stand up in court. Detectives were forced to confront a painful possibility. That the truth might involve overlapping failures rather than a single, clean act of violence. That the neighbor might have known, or suspected, or even witnessed something crucial, and chosen silence, while someone else committed the act that erased her from the town. That kind of truth is difficult to prosecute. It doesn't fit neatly into charges or sentences. It offers no simple villain, no satisfying resolution. It leaves behind only questions and shared responsibility. As the investigation strained under the weight of these revelations, one thing became clear. Ohio 1994 was not moving toward an ending. It was unraveling backward, exposing how fragile certainty is, how easily a community can mistake quiet for safety, and how a cold case can persist not because no one knows what happened, but because too many people know just enough to stay silent. And in that silence, stretched across years and faces, the missing woman remained where she had always been. At the center of everything, and just beyond everyone's reach. The case reached a point where every step forward felt like a step into fog, and yet stopping was no longer an option, because too much had been said, too many versions of the night were now floating in the open, colliding with each other, demanding to be reconciled, and the investigators understood that if the truth was ever going to surface, it would not arrive cleanly, it would have to be dragged out piece by piece, resistant, hostile, and incomplete. They returned again to the night itself, not as a sequence of events, but as a shared space where multiple lives briefly overlapped. The street. The houses. The silence between sounds. They mapped where everyone claimed to be, where lights were on, where cars were parked, where shadows fell. It was painstaking, almost obsessive work, but patterns began to emerge, not definitive ones, just impressions, the kind that leave you uneasy without explaining why. The neighbor's house sat in a position that gave him a partial view of the woman's front door, something that had never been considered important before. From his porch, he could see movement without being seen himself. He insisted this was coincidence, that the street layout was what it was, but detectives noted how often his statements included details he shouldn't have been able to observe unless he'd been paying close attention. The color of her coat. The way she held her keys. The exact moment her porch light went out. Details, again, hovering in that gray space between noticing and watching. When confronted with this, he grew defensive, accusing investigators of reading intent into memory. He said the night had replayed itself in his mind so many times over the years that the details had sharpened, not faded. Trauma does that, he said. It etches moments deeper. The explanation was plausible. It was also convenient. Meanwhile, the second suspect, the former acquaintance, began to unravel under renewed scrutiny. His statements contradicted each other in small but meaningful ways. He claimed not to have spoken to her in months, then later admitted to a brief call weeks before she vanished. He dismissed it as insignificant. Investigators did not. They pressed him on the nature of their relationship, on why it had ended, on whether resentment lingered. His answers were vague, evasive, punctuated by flashes of irritation that suggested something still raw beneath the surface. As the two narratives ran parallel, detectives faced an uncomfortable possibility. The truth might not belong to one man alone. It might exist in the space between them, in a sequence of events where one action set another in motion, where responsibility was shared but never acknowledged. That kind of case is a prosecutor's nightmare and a detective's curse, because it resists the clean lines of guilt and innocence. The town, sensing the shift, grew restless. Public meetings turned heated. People demanded transparency, demanded arrests, demanded an end to the uncertainty that had settled like a permanent cloud over their history. Law enforcement officials tried to temper expectations, but restraint sounded too much like failure to a community that had waited decades for answers. The cold case was no longer just an investigation. It was a referendum on trust. Then came another tip, quieter than the others, but more precise. A former utility worker came forward, a man who had been reluctant to speak before, unsure whether what he remembered mattered. He said he'd been working late that night in the area, responding to a minor outage. He remembered a car parked where it didn't belong, partially hidden, engine off, lights out. He remembered it because it forced him to park farther away. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now, decades later, the memory had resurfaced, sharpened by the noise surrounding the case. The description of the car didn't perfectly match any known vehicle tied to the neighbor or the former acquaintance. That discrepancy sent investigators down another rabbit hole. Was there a third presence that night? Someone unseen by everyone else? Or was memory, once again, playing tricks, reshaping itself to fit a narrative that had grown more dramatic with time? They attempted to verify the utility worker's account, pulling old work orders, shift logs, anything that could place him there definitively. Some records survived. Others did not. Enough aligned to suggest he wasn't fabricating the story, but not enough to prove it beyond doubt. The past, as always, offered just enough to tease and torment. As pressure mounted, the neighbor's health took a sudden downturn. Hospital visits replaced interviews. Medical records became a barrier investigators could not cross. Some believed it was genuine. Others suspected timing. Illness, real or exaggerated, has a way of complicating justice, especially when the clock has already run so long. With each passing week, the likelihood of ever getting a full, coherent account from him diminished. Detectives shifted focus again, this time toward motive, the one element that still felt disturbingly absent. Why her? Why that night? Why so cleanly, so completely? They revisited her life not for secrets, but for points of friction. Money. Relationships. Conflicts. The answers remained frustratingly ordinary. Nothing that screamed danger. Nothing that explained disappearance on this scale. That ordinariness became its own clue. Crimes that leave no trace are often committed by people who understand normalcy, who know how to hide within it. Someone who knew when to act, and more importantly, when not to. Someone patient. The neighbor fit that profile. So did the former acquaintance. So did, potentially, someone else entirely. As theories multiplied, so did doubts. Detectives argued late into the night, their conversations looping back on themselves, each conclusion undermined by a missing piece. The case refused to stabilize. It was as if every attempt to pin it down only caused it to fracture further. The missing woman's family, long removed from the town, watched from a distance as the story unfolded again in public. They issued a brief statement, asking for dignity, for restraint, for truth. They said they didn't care who was responsible, only that the truth be known. It was a simple request, and somehow the hardest to fulfill. In the midst of this, a realization began to crystallize, one that no one wanted to voice because of what it implied. The case might never produce the kind of answer everyone was waiting for. There might be no single confession, no recovered remains, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, there might only be a mosaic of partial truths, each insufficient on its own, collectively pointing toward a conclusion that could never be proven beyond doubt. That realization was devastating, not because it meant failure, but because it meant the story would end not with resolution, but with acceptance. Acceptance that some acts vanish into the spaces between people, into moments where silence is chosen over action, where fear outweighs responsibility. As the investigation pushed forward despite these doubts, one thing became increasingly clear. Ohio 1994 was no longer about solving a crime. It was about understanding how a community, a system, and a handful of individuals had intersected in a way that allowed a woman to disappear without a trace, and how decades later, the echo of that disappearance still had the power to unsettle everything it touched. And somewhere within that echo, the truth lingered, not hidden, not revealed, but suspended, waiting for someone brave enough, or desperate enough, to finally say the thing that had gone unsaid for far too long. The tension didn't break, it condensed, tightening around the case like a held breath, and investigators found themselves operating in a space where every new detail threatened to collapse the fragile balance they'd been maintaining, because by now the cold case had accumulated too much history, too many expectations, to withstand another false move. Ohio 1994 was no longer just unresolved. It was volatile. Behind closed doors, a decision was made to try one last tactic, something rarely acknowledged publicly but often used when evidence refuses to cooperate. They would test the narratives against each other, not in court, not even in the same room, but indirectly, feeding carefully chosen fragments of information to see what surfaced. It was risky. It could backfire. But stagnation had become its own kind of failure. They began with the neighbor. During a routine follow-up, framed as procedural housekeeping, detectives mentioned the utility worker's account, the parked car, the possibility that someone else had been present that night. They watched closely as the information landed. His reaction was immediate, visceral. He leaned back, as if creating distance between himself and the idea, and for the first time, his voice lost its measured calm. He said that was impossible. He said he would have noticed. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Would have. Not might have. Not could have. Would have. The room went still. Detectives didn't pounce. They let the silence do its work. When he realized what he'd said, he tried to recover, explaining that he meant the street was quiet, that any unfamiliar car would have stood out. But the damage was done. His certainty betrayed an intimacy with the night that exceeded anything he'd previously admitted. It suggested awareness, vigilance, and ownership of the space that felt deeply unsettling. Days later, they tried a similar approach with the former acquaintance, mentioning the neighbor's evolving statements, the possibility that someone else had heard the argument he denied ever having. His response was different but equally revealing. He scoffed, dismissing the neighbor as a lonely old man spinning stories to feel important. Then, unprompted, he added that the neighbor had always been strange, always watching, always knowing things he shouldn't. It was an offhand comment, but it struck hard. Two men, circling each other, each hinting at the other's darkness without naming it. Investigators began to suspect that whatever happened that night had been witnessed, partially, imperfectly, by more than one person, and that the fear of being implicated had locked them both into silence. Silence, once chosen, becomes harder to break the longer it's held. It reshapes memory, turns uncertainty into narrative, convinces people that saying nothing is safer than saying something incomplete. As these realizations took hold, the case file grew heavier, not with answers, but with contradictions. Timelines overlapped without aligning. Motives appeared plausible, then dissolved. Each suspect seemed to know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be decisive. It was as if the truth existed in fragments scattered across different minds, none of which could be accessed in full. Public patience wore thin. Editorials accused law enforcement of incompetence, of dragging out a story for attention. Others argued the opposite, that investigators were being too cautious, too afraid to commit. The pressure was relentless, and it seeped into every aspect of the work, turning ordinary decisions into moral calculations. Do you charge someone on circumstantial evidence and risk being wrong, or do you wait for certainty that may never come? Amid this turmoil, something unexpected happened. The neighbor stopped talking altogether. No more interviews. No more statements. His attorney issued a brief notice citing declining health and advising all inquiries be directed through legal channels. The shift was abrupt, and to detectives, telling. People don't usually retreat unless they feel exposed, or exhausted, or both. Shortly after, news came that his condition had worsened significantly. Hospitalized. In and out of consciousness. The possibility that he might die without ever clarifying his role hung over the investigation like a shadow. Some saw it as tragedy. Others as escape. Either way, time was asserting itself in the cruelest way possible. Detectives debated whether to attempt one final conversation, to press while they still could. Ethical lines blurred. Was it right to question a man at the edge of his life? Was it right not to, knowing that whatever he carried might die with him? The decision was made quietly, without ceremony. They would try. The room was smaller this time. Sterile. Monitors hummed softly in the background. When he opened his eyes, recognition flickered, followed by something like resignation. He spoke slowly, each word costing him effort. He said he hadn't meant for things to go this far. He said he thought if he waited long enough, the past would lose its grip. He said he'd been wrong. Detectives asked the question they'd been circling for years. Did you see what happened to her? He closed his eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. When he finally spoke, it wasn't an answer. It was a deflection. He said he heard something. He said he saw shapes, movement, nothing clear. He said he didn't know who it was. He said he was afraid. Afraid of being blamed. Afraid of being dragged into something he couldn't control. It was a confession of fear, not of guilt, and it was maddening in its ambiguity. Enough to suggest proximity. Not enough to establish responsibility. When they asked him why he hadn't called for help, hadn't spoken up sooner, his answer was barely audible. He said he thought someone else would. That sentence landed harder than any admission could have. Someone else would. It captured the essence of the case, the diffusion of responsibility, the way silence multiplies when people convince themselves that action is someone else's job. When the conversation ended, investigators left with nothing concrete, but something had shifted nonetheless. The neighbor had placed himself at the edge of the event, close enough to hear, to see, to suspect, and still choose an action. Whether that made him complicit or merely cowardly was a question the law might never resolve, but morally, it felt heavy. As news of his hospitalization spread, the town reacted with a strange mix of sympathy and resentment. Some prayed for him. Others prayed he would talk. The woman at the center of it all remained absent, her fate still unspoken, her story still incomplete. The investigation pressed on, but with a growing awareness that one of its central figures might soon be gone, taking with him a version of the night that no one else could fully reconstruct. And as that possibility loomed, a sobering thought settled in. The truth of Ohio 1994 might not be buried in the ground, or hidden in records, or locked in a single mind, but scattered across moments of hesitation, of fear, of silence, each one small on its own, together forming a wall no amount of time could easily break through. The neighbor lingered between life and death longer than anyone expected, suspended in that quiet, clinical limbo where time stretches and conversations take on a strange finality, and for the investigators, each day that passed felt like watching a door slowly close, because whatever he knew, whatever he might still say, was slipping further beyond reach with every shallow breath. They checked in with hospital staff, monitored updates, waited for a call that might never come, all while the case continued to move forward without him, imperfectly, reluctantly. In his absence, attention shifted again, this time more decisively toward the former acquaintance, not because he suddenly looked more guilty, but because he was the only remaining thread that still moved when pulled. Detectives re-examined his history with the woman, not for dramatic revelations, but for patterns. Control. Possessiveness. The kind of resentment that doesn't explode, but simmers, quietly, until the right moment. They found old messages remembered but never saved, arguments recalled but never reported. Nothing actionable on its own. Everything unsettling in accumulation. They brought him in again, this time under the weight of public scrutiny that had grown impossible to ignore. The tone was different now. Less exploratory. More confrontational. They laid out what they had. The overheard argument. The utility worker's car. The neighbor's statements placing an unknown presence on the street. They didn't accuse him directly. They didn't need to. The implication filled the room. He responded with anger, then sarcasm, then silence. He accused the department of chasing ghosts, of trying to pin decades of failure on whoever was still alive to question. When asked where he was that night, he repeated his alibi with increasing irritation, as if volume might turn memory into fact. Detectives noted the shift. People telling the truth tend to repeat themselves consistently. People constructing a story often grow defensive when asked to walk it again. Still, there was no collapse. No dramatic slip. Just resistance. Outside the interview room, frustration mounted. The case had become a maze with no center, each path looping back on itself. Investigators began to consider a possibility that had once felt unthinkable. That the disappearance might never be proven as a homicide at all. That whatever happened to her might exist in a gray zone the law struggles to define. Coercion without witnesses. Violence without remains. Fear without fingerprints. That ambiguity complicated everything, especially the looming decision prosecutors faced. Without a body, without physical evidence, without a clear confession, any charges would rest on inference and narrative. Juries, they knew, are uncomfortable with absence. They want something tangible. Something they can point to and say, this is what happened. Ohio 1994 offered no such clarity. As legal debates intensified, the public conversation grew harsher. Online, theories hardened into convictions. People chose sides, not based on evidence, but on instinct, on who felt more dangerous, more suspicious. The neighbor, once the focus, began to fade from outrage as his condition worsened. Sympathy crept in, unwelcome and complicated. Attention swung back to the former acquaintance, now cast as the last viable villain in a story that demanded one. Through it all, the woman herself remained strangely distant, reduced to a name, a photograph, a symbol. Detectives felt this acutely. They revisited her personal effects, the few items recovered from her home, trying to reconnect with her as a person rather than a case. A handwritten note. A book with a folded corner marking a page. Ordinary things, suddenly heavy with meaning. They reminded everyone involved that this wasn't an abstract puzzle. It was a life interrupted. Then, quietly, another piece fell into place. A retired dispatcher, prompted by the renewed attention, came forward with a memory she'd carried for years without understanding its significance. She recalled a call from the area that night, not logged as an emergency, not officially tied to the case. A hang-up. Static. A muffled voice. It had been dismissed at the time as nothing. Now, decades later, it took on a different shape. Records were checked. The call existed, barely, a faint mark in an old system that had since been replaced. The timing aligned loosely with the window of the disappearance. The location matched the neighborhood. It was not proof. It was suggestion. But in a case built on absence, even suggestion mattered. Detectives wondered whether the call came from the woman herself, or from someone nearby. Whether it was an attempt to reach out, or an interruption. Whether it represented the moment when fear crossed into action. They would never know. The technology of the time could not give them more than that. A trace of a voice, cut off before it could be heard. This discovery reframed the neighbor's final words. I thought someone else would. The dispatcher's memory suggested that maybe she had thought the same. That maybe she had reached for help, only to be swallowed by silence, by delay, by systems not designed to catch whispers. The former acquaintance was confronted with this new information. His reaction was muted, almost weary. He said it proved nothing. He said people make calls all the time. He said it didn't change where he was that night. His tone, however, had softened. The anger was gone, replaced by something closer to resignation. Detectives wondered whether this was the beginning of a break, or simply the fatigue of a man who realized the story would never fully release him. As summer approached, the neighbor's condition worsened. When the call finally came, it wasn't from him. It was from the hospital, informing investigators that he had passed in the early hours of the morning. No final statement. No deathbed confession. Just silence, absolute and permanent. The news landed heavily. For some, it felt like the end of a chapter. For others, the loss of a chance. Detectives reviewed their notes from the hospital visit, parsing every word he'd spoken, every pause, every deflection, knowing that whatever meaning they found there would have to last. He was gone now, and with him, a perspective no one else could provide. In the town, reactions were mixed. Some mourned. Some expressed anger. Some felt nothing at all, exhausted by years of emotional investment. The case, however, did not close. If anything, his death sharpened its edges. One source of ambiguity had been removed, but the questions he left behind loomed larger than ever. With the neighbor gone, the investigation narrowed, but it did not simplify. The former acquaintance remained, still denying involvement, still protected by the same absence of proof that had defined the case from the beginning. Prosecutors weighed their options carefully, aware that whatever decision they made would be scrutinized, criticized, second-guessed. And in the quiet moments, when the noise of media and public debate fell away, the investigators were left with a sobering understanding. That Ohio 1994 might never offer the kind of resolution people crave. That the truth, fragmented and incomplete, might only ever be approached, never fully reached. The woman's disappearance had become a space everyone projected their fears into. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being unheard. Fear that in the wrong moment, silence could swallow a life whole. And as the case edged closer to its final reckoning, one thing was undeniable. Whatever the outcome, whatever the official conclusion, the cold case had already done its damage, leaving behind a town permanently altered by the knowledge that some nights do not end cleanly, and some questions do not fade, no matter how much time passes. With the neighbor gone, the case entered its most uncomfortable phase, the one where there were no more voices to add, only old ones to reinterpret, and investigators felt the weight of finality pressing in, because death has a way of locking stories in place, turning uncertainty into something permanent. Ohio 1994 had lost one of its central figures, and the silence he left behind was louder than anything he'd ever said. Attention now focused almost exclusively on the former acquaintance, not because the evidence had suddenly strengthened, but because the narrative had collapsed inward, leaving him as the only remaining person whose version of the night still mattered. Detectives assembled what they had into a single, cohesive theory, not for the public, not even for court, but for themselves, a way to see whether the fragments could form something recognizable when placed side by side. In that theory, the woman's fear was real and growing. She had sensed something off, whether from past interactions or more recent encounters. The phone call, the argument overheard, the unlogged hang-up call, all pointed toward escalating tension. The former acquaintance fit into that picture uncomfortably well. Someone who knew her routines. Someone who had access. Someone who had reason, however mundane, to feel entitled to her time and attention. But theory is not proof, and every attempt to solidify it ran into the same wall. No witnesses willing to go on record. No physical evidence tying him to her disappearance. No body to establish a crime had even occurred. Prosecutors listened, asked questions, then leaned back and shook their heads. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The decision that followed was one of the hardest the department had faced in years. They would not file charges. Not now. They would keep the case technically open, but inactive. The announcement was carefully worded, emphasizing ongoing commitment, future leads, the possibility of new technology. It was the language of restraint, of realism. To many in the town, it sounded like surrender. The reaction was swift and brutal. Accusations flew. Vigils were held, candles flickering in the same places they had decades earlier. The woman's name was spoken again and again, sometimes in anger, sometimes in grief. People demanded to know how a confession, however incomplete, and a pattern of suspicious behavior could still lead to nothing. The answer, uncomfortable and unsatisfying, was that the law does not operate on feeling. The former acquaintance, for his part, remained outwardly unchanged. He gave no interviews. He made no public statements. He lived under a cloud of suspicion that never quite condensed into consequence. For some, that was justice denied. For others, it was the system working as designed, protecting against irreversible mistakes. The truth lay somewhere in between, in a space no one felt good about. Investigators felt it most acutely. They carried the case with them, even as they were reassigned, even as new crimes demanded attention. Ohio 1994 became a reference point, a cautionary tale whispered in hallways, a reminder of how easily things can slip away if the moment to act is missed. It haunted their careers, not because of what they'd done wrong, but because of what they could never make right. Years passed quietly. The headlines stopped. The town changed. New houses were built. Old ones were renovated. Children who had been too young to remember grew up hearing the story secondhand, as legend more than reality. And yet, beneath the surface, the case never fully disappeared. It lingered in the way people talked about safety, about watching out for each other, about trusting instincts that feel inconvenient. Every so often, a new tip would come in, sparked by a documentary, a podcast, a late-night conversation. Each was evaluated. Each fell short. The pattern repeated so often it became ritualistic. Hope flared. Hope faded. The cold case remained. The woman's family, aging now, marked time in anniversaries rather than years. They spoke less publicly, choosing private remembrance over public appeals. In interviews given rarely and carefully, they expressed a quiet resignation, not acceptance, but endurance. They had learned to live with the absence of answers, even as it continued to shape their lives in ways no one else could see. In private moments, investigators revisited the neighbor's final words, the former acquaintance's evasions, the dispatcher's memory of a call that went nowhere. They wondered how many times help had been close and missed. How many people had stood at the edge of involvement and stepped back, convinced it wasn't their place. The case had become an anatomy of hesitation. Ohio 1994 was now a cold case in the truest sense, not just unsolved, but settled into its own shape, resistant to change. It existed as a warning more than a mystery, a demonstration of how silence compounds, how ordinary choices can have extraordinary consequences. There was no single moment to point to and say, this is where it went wrong. There were many, layered on top of each other, each one small enough to be dismissed at the time. And yet, even in this apparent stillness, the case exerted a pull. Investigators knew that as long as the file existed, as long as the woman's name was written there, the possibility of change remained, however slim. All it would take was one piece that didn't fit the old patterns, one voice that chose to speak where others had stayed quiet. Until then, Ohio 1994 lived on as a story without resolution, a truth without confirmation, a disappearance that refused to be explained away. It asked a question that echoed long after official efforts had ceased, a question directed not just at those involved, but at anyone listening. What would you have done, standing on that quiet street, hearing something that might be nothing, and deciding whether to act, or to stay silent? Time did what it always does when answers refuse to surface. It dulled the sharpest edges without ever closing the wound. The case file gathered weight instead of dust, thick with paper, transcripts, handwritten notes from detectives who had long since retired or passed away, their observations frozen in ink, their questions unanswered. Ohio 1994 was no longer a living investigation, but it was not dead either. It existed in a limbo where facts stayed fixed while meaning continued to shift. New technology arrived with quiet promise. Databases expanded. Old evidence, once considered useless, was re-evaluated under brighter lights and stronger lenses. Fibers were re-examined. Audio tapes were digitized, cleaned, replayed at different speeds, different frequencies, as if a hidden voice might suddenly emerge from the static and speak clearly at last. It never did. Each advancement offered the same cruel tease, the suggestion that resolution was just one breakthrough away, followed by the familiar disappointment of nothing changing. The neighborhood itself became a kind of archive. Some houses remained exactly as they were in 1994, porches sagging slightly more, paint faded, driveways cracked by time. Others had been remodeled beyond recognition, their past scrubbed clean by fresh siding and manicured lawns. New residents moved in with no memory of the woman who vanished, no awareness that their evening walks followed paths once traced by search teams and patrol cars. For them, the street was just a street. For those who remembered, it was something else entirely. Occasionally, someone would come forward claiming to know something new. A former coworker. A distant relative. A friend of a friend who'd heard a story at a bar years earlier. Detectives listened, always polite, always cautious, their reactions carefully neutral. Most tips unraveled within hours. Dates didn't line up. Details shifted under gentle questioning. Memory proved unreliable, a poor substitute for evidence. Still, every lead was logged. Every name was recorded. The ritual continued, not because it worked, but because stopping felt like giving up. The former acquaintance aged into obscurity, his presence in the case reduced to a few lines in an official summary and a larger space in public suspicion. He moved. Changed jobs. Attempted, unsuccessfully, to outpace the shadow that followed him. Wherever he went, someone seemed to recognize his name, his face, his connection to a woman who had never been found. He lived a life defined not by conviction, but by implication, a reminder that legal innocence and social absolution are not the same thing. For investigators, the case became personal in unexpected ways. Younger officers, brought in long after the disappearance, studied it as part of their training, absorbing its lessons like cautionary scripture. Don't ignore your instincts. Don't delay paperwork. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Veterans spoke of it in quieter tones, usually late at night, usually after most people had gone home. They remembered the early days, the choices that seemed reasonable at the time, the small compromises made under pressure. None of them could say for sure whether a different decision would have changed the outcome. That uncertainty was its own punishment. The woman herself risked becoming abstract, a symbol instead of a person. Detectives fought against that, rereading personal notes, listening to old interviews with friends and family, trying to hold on to who she had been beyond the headlines. She had liked simple routines. She had been reliable, cautious, the kind of person who didn't vanish without reason. That detail mattered. It was the anchor of the entire case. Something had happened to disrupt a life that did not naturally drift away. Every anniversary brought renewed attention. Articles resurfaced. Television segments replayed grainy footage and familiar sound bites. The phrase cold case appeared again and again, as if repetition could somehow force meaning into it. Viewers responded with outrage, sympathy, speculation. Online forums filled with theories, some thoughtful, others reckless. Names were dragged back into the light, examined, accused, defended, all without consequence. The noise grew louder, but clarity never followed. Behind closed doors, investigators wrestled with a question they rarely voiced aloud. Had the neighbor's partial confession been the truth, distorted by fear and self-preservation, or a desperate attempt to make sense of his own proximity to the crime? His death had sealed that question permanently. There would be no follow-up. No clarification. His words existed as they were, suspended in ambiguity, neither fully believable nor easily dismissed. The case taught everyone involved an uncomfortable lesson about time. Not just how it passes, but how it reshapes perception. What once seemed urgent now felt distant. What had been uncertain hardened into accepted narrative. The story people told about Ohio 1994 became almost as influential as the facts themselves, guiding suspicion, shaping memory, influencing which leads felt plausible and which did not. The truth, whatever it was, sat buried somewhere beneath layers of interpretation. And still, the file remained open. Technically. Officially. A status that carried more emotional weight than practical effect. It was a promise without a timeline, an acknowledgement that the question had not been answered, even if no one knew how to answer it. Detectives checked the box during audits. They confirmed the case was still active in name. Then they moved on to the next demand, the next emergency, the next life balanced on the edge of uncertainty. Late at night, some of them revisited the scene in their minds, reconstructing it again and again, hoping repetition might reveal what analysis had not. The quiet street. The unanswered call. The moment when something ordinary tipped into something irreversible. They imagined alternative outcomes, paths not taken, doors opened instead of closed. These exercises never changed the record, but they changed the people doing them, reinforcing a vigilance born of regret. Ohio 1994 did not end. It settled. It became part of the town's identity, part of the department's institutional memory, part of the larger conversation about how crimes can persist not because they are unsolvable, but because they slip through gaps created by human hesitation. It was a reminder that mystery does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as routine, and waits for someone to notice before it's too late. The case lingered in that space, unresolved but present, a constant undercurrent beneath everyday life. And for those who knew its details, truly knew them, there was always the sense that something had been missed, something small and specific, still out there, waiting to be recognized. In the end, what remained was not a revelation, not a confession that finally aligned with the facts, not a late-breaking arrest that restored balance to a story long tilted toward uncertainty. What remained was the echo. The kind that settles into a place and never fully leaves. Ohio 1994 became less a case than a presence, something felt rather than actively pursued, something that hovered at the edge of memory, waiting for a reason to surface again. The street was quiet now. Too quiet to match what it carried. On most days, nothing marked it as different from any other residential block in the state. Cars passed. Lights turned on and off. People lived their lives unaware that this stretch of pavement had once been the center of a storm that never truly broke. The absence was invisible, but it was there, embedded in the ordinary rhythm of the place, a missing beat no one knew could hear. For the investigators who had stayed with the case the longest, retirement came without closure. There were no final briefings, no last-minute discoveries slipped across a desk. They packed their offices knowing one file would never be stamped solved, one name would never be crossed off a list. Some took copies of notes home, not officially, not formally, but in their heads, replaying conversations and timelines the way other people replay old songs. They told themselves it was time to let go. They never really did. The woman's name appeared less frequently in the news as years passed, but it never vanished entirely. It surfaced in footnotes, in retrospectives, in long lists of the missing and the unresolved. Each appearance was brief, almost clinical, yet it carried the weight of everything that hadn't been said, everything that hadn't been proven. She became one of many, and that was perhaps the cruelest transformation of all. The former acquaintance eventually faded from public focus, not because suspicion had lifted, but because attention moved on. New cases demanded outrage. New mysteries filled the space once occupied by this one. His story ended without punctuation, neither confirmed nor denied, a life bracketed by doubt. He was never charged. He was never cleared. He existed in the gray space the justice system leaves behind when certainty refuses to cooperate. As for the neighbor, his final words remained suspended in the record, neither embraced nor erased. They were studied, debated, dismissed, resurrected, depending on who was reading them and why. His death had closed one door while sealing another shut. Whatever truth he carried went with him, leaving behind only fragments that never quite aligned. The case taught the town something it didn't want to learn. That answers are not guaranteed. That proximity does not equal knowledge. That danger can sit next door without ever announcing itself. People spoke more quietly about what had happened, but they spoke differently, with an awareness sharpened by experience. Doors were locked earlier. Calls were returned faster. Instincts were trusted a little more, even when they felt inconvenient. In the wider world, Ohio 1994 became a reference point, a name invoked in discussions about cold cases, about missed opportunities, about the limits of investigation when time and silence worked together. It was cited not because it was unique, but because it was painfully familiar. A reminder that unresolved cases are not anomalies, but part of a pattern that repeats wherever hesitation meets chance. There was no final scene, no dramatic closure to lean on. Just the slow accumulation of years, each one adding distance without adding clarity. The file remained where it had always been, accessible, intact, waiting. Waiting for a witness who no longer feared consequences. Waiting for a detail overlooked decades earlier. Waiting for someone, somewhere, to recognize the significance of something they had once dismissed as nothing. And in that waiting, the case continued to ask its question, quietly but persistently. Not who did it, or how, or even why. But how many moments like this exist, unnoticed, unresolved, carried forward by communities that learn to live around them? How many answers are lost not to malice, but to delay? How many truths dissolve simply because no one speaks at the right time? Ohio 1994 never offered relief. It offered a warning. That mystery does not always announce itself with violence or chaos. Sometimes it arrives as silence. Sometimes it wears the face of routine. Sometimes it stands just close enough to touch, then slips away forever. The case remains open. The street remains quiet. And somewhere between what is known and what can never be proven, the story continues, not as a solved crime, but as an enduring absence, a shadow that lengthens with time, reminding anyone who listens that some stories do not end. They linger. There is a moment, usually late at night, when unresolved cases feel closest to resolution, not because new information appears, but because the noise of the world finally drops away. Ohio 1994 lives in that hour. In the quiet between midnight and morning, when streets empty and phones stop ringing, the absence sharpens again, and the case feels less like history and more like something unfinished, something waiting to be disturbed. In those hours, the town remembers without meaning to. A porch light left on too long. A dog barking at nothing. A car slowing as it passes the old house, even now, even after the paint has changed and the mailbox has been replaced. Small hesitations, barely conscious, but shared. The kind that come from knowing something once went wrong here and was never put right. The records still exist, stored in climate-controlled rooms, labeled, cataloged, preserved. Paper does not forget, even when people do. Names sit beside dates. Times sit beside locations. A call logged but never answered. A statement taken but never followed. Each line represents a decision, an action, or a pause. Together, they form a map of how a mystery survives. Occasionally, someone new opens the file. A researcher. A journalist. A detective too young to have lived through it the first time. They read it differently, without the emotional fatigue of those who were there from the beginning. They notice patterns others dismissed as coincidence. They question assumptions that hardened into fact simply through repetition. Fresh eyes, briefly, bring the case back to life. But the file resists. Every promising angle collapses under scrutiny. Timelines almost align, then don't. Motives feel plausible, then evaporate. People who once might have talked are gone, their silence now permanent. The case defends itself with time, with erosion, with the simple reality that truth becomes harder to extract the longer it is buried. The woman at the center of it all remains strangely vivid in these late re-examinations. Not as a victim frozen in her final moments, but as a presence before disappearance. Her routines. Her habits. The predictability of a life that did not suggest escape or reinvention. That consistency is what keeps pulling investigators back. People who plan to leave traces. She left none. That fact alone continues to whisper something darker. That whatever happened was sudden. Disruptive. Unplanned. A break in routine so complete it erased her from the map without warning. No suitcase. No note. No credible sighting. Just a gap where a person had been, and a community forced to grow around it. The neighbor's proximity still raises questions that cannot be resolved. Distance measured in feet, not miles. A voice overheard. A confession that stopped short of clarity. His death removed not just a suspect, but a potential key, locking certain doors forever. Whether he was responsible or merely adjacent to the truth, he carried something important, and it was never fully transferred to the record. The former acquaintance remains a figure shaped more by implication than evidence. In some tellings, he is the obvious answer. In others, a convenient one. The danger of unresolved cases is how easily they invite certainty without proof, how quickly suspicion can harden into belief. Investigators know this. It is why restraint persists, even when patience has long run out. As years stack up, the case stops aging normally. It doesn't feel older. It feels suspended. Frozen at the moment where intervention might have changed everything. That suspension creates its own tension, a pressure that never fully releases. It is felt most by those who know the details, who understand how close resolution once seemed, and how quietly it slipped away. Ohio 1994 now exists in two versions at once. The official one, defined by files, procedures, and careful language. And the lived one, defined by memory, intuition, and unease. The first insists on evidence. The second insists that something happened here, something wrong, something unfinished. They coexist without reconciling. No final chapter arrives to settle the argument. No closing statement resolves the contradictions. Instead, the case continues to function as a mirror, reflecting the limits of certainty, the cost of hesitation, the way ordinary environments can conceal extraordinary harm. It reminds anyone who studies it that mystery does not always end in revelation. Sometimes, it ends in endurance. The street remains quiet. The file remains open. The woman remains missing. And somewhere, in a detail still overlooked or a memory still unspoken, the truth waits without urgency, patient as time itself, asking the same silent question it has asked for decades, unanswered, undiminished, and impossible to ignore for those who know where to listen.